Hi, everybody. This is Mike Ungar, and I'm really fortunate today to be with Mike Yost and Remus Pop as part of our Industry 4.0 Club Fireside Chat. This week's Fireside Chat, we're going to focus on learning from Remus about how we would leverage technology to advance manufacturing. So we're really glad to have everybody here. Just a quick introduction about the Industry 4.0 Club. Our focus is to advance the deployment and implementation of Industry 4.0 across a diverse audience and with diverse companies worldwide. So we're really excited to be able to have this conversation. We host meaningful conversations Monday through Thursday. Typically, Monday we'll talk about women in manufacturing. Tuesday will be the future of manufacturing, we'll focus on a technical topic. Wednesday is our fireside chat, and Thursday we look at people, culture, and processes. This particular broadcast today is going to be pre-recorded. So we invite you to leave your comments, and we'll follow up with you after the broadcast to answer your questions that you might have for Remus during this session. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm one of the co-founders of the Industry 4.0 Club. I recently retired from Michelin North America, where I worked in continuous improvement, operations, finance, and HR. And we're really excited today to spend the time with you. Let me pass it over to my co-host, Mike Yost. Mike, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mike, and welcome, everybody. As Mike mentioned, my name is Mike Yost. I'm one of the co-founders of the Industry 4.0 Club and Mike's co-host here with our Fireside Chat. I've been in industry for 30 years and am the founder of a company called Bennett, where our focus is to connect people to help solve manufacturing problems. So really excited because Remus has tons of experience that I think is going to lead to a great conversation here. Just to briefly set the stage, Remus is the senior partner solution architect at AWS, Amazon Web Services. He's got a great, strong industry background with operations technology experience at a manufacturer, strong advisory consulting skills, and systems architecture and integration experience dating back well over a decade. So he's got great practical experience, and he promises to help us avoid buzzwords and talk about real value here. So Remus, we're really excited to have you here. So thank you for being here. And if you would, maybe just take a second and introduce yourself to the audience here today.
Sure. First off, thanks, Mike Yost and Mike Unger for the opportunity to come on and chat for a little bit. It's something I'm really passionate about. The technology around Industry 4.0 and what's happening in manufacturing, I think it's never been more exciting to be in this space than it is right now. So, thanks for having me on and giving me the ability to chat about this a little bit. My background started not too differently from, I'm sure, most of the people listening. I kind of out of college got a job as an integration support guy, just doing controls work for a local company here. And, being based out of the Detroit area, the majority of that work was in automotive. So I spent a lot of time, deploying assembly solutions and manufacturing solutions for Ford, GM, Chrysler. I've probably been in, over 100 factories worldwide, doing a variety of different roles. But the first 5 years was really focused on controls work. So programming PLCs, deploying, robotic systems and automation assembly lines and all that type of stuff. During that time, I did a little bit of work in the battery industry. So I got an opportunity to work with a company called A123 Systems that was, launched here as part of the new green initiatives back in 2008. And we did a lot of work building lithium ion batteries here in Michigan. Unfortunately, after about 2 years with that company, the company went bankrupt and we were purchased by a Chinese entity. So during that time, I was given the opportunity and I volunteered to deploy an MES system at our sister plant in Hangzhou, China. So we had a pretty robust MES system at our facility here in Michigan, and it was doing a lot of things like data tracking, track and traceability, genealogy, collecting a large amount of data, because when you build a lithium ion battery, as you can imagine, there's a lot of data that goes with that. So my job was to kind of take that same system that we had here in Michigan and deploy it in China. And that's really kind of where my first foray into the world of digital started. I basically, had to look up and find an MES system that I could deploy rapidly in China. So I literally Googled, off-the-shelf MES system, and I landed on a product called Ignition, and that's kind of been part of my story ever since. But during the next 2 years, I deployed that project in China, did a lot of work there, traveling back and forth, and then, kind of wrapped that up with a successful deployment there. And then jumped into an opportunity as a solution architect for another local company called Red Viking. And in that role, I kind of started to understand how the value that I'd learned over deploying an MES system was valuable to other companies that were looking to do the same. So my first customer was Dana Corporation. So I worked with them for about a year before they just hired me outright. I guess it was a lot easier than dealing with the consultancy and all that stuff. So I spent the next 3 years at Dana. The first project there was to deploy kind of a similar thing that I did at A123. They were launching a new facility in Toledo to support Chrysler. And we deployed an MES system to do track and traceability and the other functions that would serve that. But during that time, we started to see that there was other opportunity to leverage some of the connectivity that we had at that plant. So this plant was a brand new greenfield facility. Everything was new Rockwell, already connected to the network, the most modern that you could get. And so we saw an opportunity to take advantage of all that connectivity. So we deployed a solution to track things like OEE. We were starting to pull data up and send it to the cloud for, AI and ML future projects. So we really started to understand the value. And it was so valuable that the company decided to make it part of its core initiatives. And we were given the opportunity to take that project and that effort that we did in Toledo and roll it out to, basically the rest of the facilities, which is, over 100 that Dana had. And
wow.
So our first year we did about 18 or 20 plants. I don't remember the exact number, where we took that project and deployed it all over the world. The following year, we did another 10 or 15, and then the project's continuing even to this day, long after I've left. But right. What we really started to learn during that process is that there is a tremendous amount of business value that's generated from this technology that we deployed, right? Like some things I often say is that given the opportunity, I would deploy technology just for fun, right? I'm a little bit of a tech geek. So I love to do that stuff, and I'd love to just do it all day long for free if I could. But right. Ultimately, what we do is try to serve the business, right? So if we don't kind of help in that space, our projects aren't very successful. So
can I ask you a quick question about that? So that's you said something interesting there, and that's how do you avoid deploying technology for technology's sake? You mentioned how much fun that is.
Yeah,
versus just where you're not at where you could take the risk of not getting the value from it. So how do you avoid? You want to advance in your productivity and your technology, but you also don't want to just do it to do it. Tell me, how do you avoid that?
So this circles back to, something we talk about a lot and question that people always have is how do we get started? And I think if you start with a problem, a business problem, mm-hmm. right? Like every factory that you walk into, someone in that facility knows what's wrong, right? Whether it's this machine over there goes down all the time, right? We can't keep it up. It doesn't run as much as we think it should. Or that machine over there produces a bunch of bad product, right? Mm-hmm. So if you focus on a problem and you tackle the problem first, I feel like that's probably the best way to avoid just deploying, technology for the sake of it, right? Like I think the common saying is if you take software and try to find a problem, you're going to have a bad time. But if you start with the problem and see how software technology can help, it's generally the best place to start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with a automotive background, it's a pretty mature space, a pretty mature industry. So you've got a ton of credibility and experience to have that focus. My first question on my list is always, let's talk business value. And then, how do you talk to manufacturers about technology, where it fits and what the value is, right? Which you just started with, right? You're starting with the problem. I guess when you have conversations, just broadly speaking, do most manufacturers that you deal with come to you with that mindset? That they've identified problems and they're saying, hey, can you help us figure out the best technology to deliver against this? Or are they typically chasing technology for technology's sake?
So when I left Dana, myself and my boss at the time, Matt Townsend, we left to join a consulting company because we saw that there was opportunity to help other companies that were struggling with the same thing that we just spent the last 3 years doing. So we went and joined Riveron and started an Industry 4.0 digital factory, smart factory, whatever you want to call it, kind of consulting service there to kind of answer that exact question. And what we saw right away is if you would have asked me while I was at Dana, where does automotive fit on the adoption of Industry 4.0, I would have said, we're probably way behind. There's so much more stuff that we could be doing. And then once I started the consultant thing and I started to see all these other different industries, I realized that automotive is probably the furthest ahead, right? As far as maybe pharma is probably the leader, but I'd say automotive is pretty close behind them. So I think, just understanding that gave us a really good mindset. And I would say, like, for most customers, have a pretty good idea that there's an issue and they want to solve this issue, and they want to see how technology can help them. But I have seen exactly what you're talking about, where somebody sat in a webinar or, with all the buzz around Industry 4.0 right now, where it saw something and it was like, wow, we got to use the technology. Where do we fit it? So I've seen it both. I think it's really interesting to see how different industries adapt to the different challenges. But I think for me, and for what we see, I would say the majority of our customers came to us with a problem, and then how do we start to use technology? But there was definitely a couple that just said, hey, how do we? AR was one that comes to mind. Is how, we want to do AR in our facilities. Where do we go?
I'll date myself.
We try to solve.
I'll date myself a bit, but one of my favorite anecdotes is running a working group session at an event for Mesa International, and having a young IT leader from a small company raise his hand and say, "My boss just walked in. He's the owner of the company. He handed me a tablet, right? He handed me an iPad and said, 'What can you do with this?'" And this automotive guy on the other side of the room almost flipped the table over, stood up, slammed his desk, and said, "That's the wrong question, right? What problem does he want to solve? Then you tell him whether he needs an iPad or not."
Exactly.
So, yeah, so I definitely get that.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting dichotomy, because you have this new set of tools, all this technology, and you certainly don't want to be the last person to take advantage of what might be a competitive improvement.
Yeah.
So it's a real interesting dilemma, because I'm sure there are alternatives that aren't technology based or that are more manual, if you will, that would also bring you some benefit. Have you run into the folks that debate that I'll call them the lean tools that are visual and manual versus the technology? Have you run into that?
It was certainly something that we ran into a lot at a company as old as Dana was, right? Dana was, around since the early 1900s. So, there was a lot of people there that have been there for a very long time. And so some of the challenges that we often face was convincing, some of the older folks in the manufacturing environment that, hey, we're not significantly moving away from those principles that you hold so dear and are valuable to the way you do your job. We're simply trying to augment them to make your job easier, make you more efficient, more effective, and to take away some of those pain points, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the idea that we see in these companies too, is when you talk to that frontline workforce as we deploy these solutions, a lot of them think it's Big Brother coming to get a bigger hammer to hit them over the head with, right? And we really, there's a lot of work to structure the conversation around that. It's not what we're using this for. It's more of a tool to help us learn more about your problems. What makes you most effective at your job? How do you perform at your most optimal level? And using these sort of technologies and kind of where we go with this stuff helps us understand that. And really they start to become our biggest advocates as we show them how the technology helps them do their job better. They start to become like, wow, man, if I'd had this tool 20 years ago, we would be, so much further than we are now. So I think those conversations are challenging at first, but I mean, ultimately, the common saying, proof is in the pudding, right? Once you deploy something and show that, hey, look at what we can do with this new data, right? I'm taking an example of when we first started our consulting thing. We went to a company that was having an issue with an ultrasonic welder. Mm-hmm. And the maintenance team there was having all kinds of problems with this thing. They were losing one of these a month for, they were like $30,000 a piece, and they were blowing these up like once a month. And they couldn't quite figure it out what was happening, right? So we deployed a little bit of technology, started collecting data, and just with a simple dashboard, we could see right away within the first 24 hours of connecting that data in that the problem was the tips were getting dirty on this ultrasonic welder. And we could see that because the cycle time would start to ever so slightly increase to the point where it was just kind of a straight line break. And so we could see, your cycle time was standard 1 second. Now it's 1.1. Now it's 1.2. Now it's 1.3. So we now gave the maintenance team this tool. Hey, here's your alert metric, right? When you see this thing start to creep up, go clean that tip, and you don't have to blow through these once a month. And I think that type of conversational effort is what kind of gets that buy-in that you need.
You mentioned when we talked about starting with the problem in mind, that seems straightforward. I've got a brownfield environment, and I think you shared with us you did a greenfield installation. Talk about how you start with a greenfield, because that's different. You don't necessarily start with a problem because you haven't built the plant yet.
So in the automotive world, the greenfield is just the biggest problem is brownfield, right? Startup and launch are huge costs and huge time sinks. So we had a pretty good problem to tackle is how do we reduce the launch curve, right? We want to get to we want to get to full production faster. So how do we do that, right? So even in a greenfield site, there's opportunity. I think if you start with monitoring what as a buyer of equipment, I want to make sure that the equipment that I bought is performing to the level that was stated as I bought it, right? So I think the opportunity in that greenfield space is just to ensure your success, right? Make sure that the equipment that you purchase is running the way it should. It's not, low on. If you bought it to make 5 widgets an hour and it's only making 3 widgets an hour, something's clearly wrong, right? And that'll point you to, okay, now where's your problem? Now you have metrics to start to pinpoint those problems. I think that's probably a pretty good way to look at greenfield. Certainly is another way to probably potentially look at it is all of this data that you're going to have, because it's easy to get to, start to think about what opportunities do we have down the road with that data, right? I mean, AI, ML is the big topic right now, trying to understand, like, if we structure our data well, there's opportunity there to find improvement.
Thank you.
Well, I know in the automotive space, everything changes except the launch date, right? So,
yep, exactly.
Yeah. I just want to take a step back. You mentioned a couple of times your MES experience. I come from the MES field as well, and I think that from our vantage point at the club here, we're looking to really serve everybody. So smaller companies as well, and oftentimes they'll get. They hear the term MES and they'll get overwhelmed, like, oh, we don't need an MES. But each time you said MES, you talked about like track and trace capabilities, like a subset, like core things. So to maybe sort of break that down and sort of where you see, if you're going to make it understandable, digestible for people, like, would you say, all right, is it data connectivity and visualization, tracking, tracing, those sorts of things, reporting, as opposed to saying, oh, wow, we have this huge Industry 4.0 or MES type initiative? Like, how would you tell people to get started?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic right now. It's one I spent a lot of time talking with friends in the space about. I think if you would have asked that question a couple of years ago, the answer would have been very different than it is today. And I think one of the things that we're seeing today in the space of MES, and especially with the cloud providers like AWS, is that the functionalities, the different pillars of MES are starting to be broken out into separate entities, right? So traditionally, you would think of an MES system as track and traceability, OEE, tying into inventory, production orders, all of that different stuff. And that led to a lot of the problems that we saw in the early years, is that to get this small little bit of functionality, I had to buy this giant monolithic system of MES, right? I had to spend $180,000 to get this small little $10,000 piece of software that I needed the functionality for. Right. And I think what's really interesting over the last couple of years is companies are starting to see that there's opportunity in the space to just serve one part of that MES functionality, right? Maybe it's just, I don't need track and trace, I don't need tying into SAP or ERP, I don't need inventory management. I just want to know what's my OEE, right? Traditionally, we thought of OEE as part of MES, but now I see dozens and dozens of products out there that are just strictly focused on serving that small niche of customers, right? Somebody that just wants to know, how is my equipment running versus what it should be doing.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that one of the things that I try to encourage smaller companies to take advantage of or recognize is we're at a point where along the lines of what you just said about the infrastructure you have to put in place and all this infrastructure that has to be there to get that core functionality. We're now at a point where you can drop software, but also hardware, right? So sensors and things like that, where you used to historically have to have so much core infrastructure just to get the data connected and flowing and visualized and all that kind of stuff. And I always tell people, I wear a sleep ring, right? And it's an IoT sensor and it's connected to the cloud and I pay $6 a month. And yeah, exactly. So you have this opportunity now, as much as I hate to promote technology as the reason to get in the conversation, but we really can leapfrog some things now. Like you said, if you want that core capability, probably grab some sensors and grab some tech that's a lot easier to connect and start data moving and things like that.
Yeah, I'd say one of the interesting, so, to complete the full circle of my career, now I'm with AWS. And one of the reasons is that I was so interested in the opportunity when it came my way is because you could see in all of the different, places out there, the way that the cloud is starting to come and creep into a lot of what we've been doing, in manufacturing for some time. I've said a bunch of times, right? We've been doing Industry 4.0 for 20 or so years, right? We just never called it Industry 4. We've always been collecting data and putting it in databases and building dashboards and doing all these cool things. But now I think what's really changed is the ability to interconnect all these different systems in microservice architecture, right? So kind of one of the things that AWS is so strong at is that decoupling of all the different service offerings. So, it's really interesting to see how companies are taking advantage of the AWS infrastructure, especially around, you said IoT, and in our world it's IIoT, right? But like the sensorization of equipment can be done so effectively now and so efficiently at such a low cost. It's, we talked a little bit earlier, you mentioned, how does some of the smaller companies get started? And now I think the barrier to entry is so small. It's, a couple $100, you can get a sensor on a machine to monitor vibration, right? Maybe you just throw a little vibration sensor on a CNC spindle and you get some decent metrics on how vibrative that tool is. And you can kind of get some ideas. Is it running as well as it should? Is it efficient? Is it not efficient? Is it going to go down soon? So I think, it's really interesting to see what's evolving in this space, and we're seeing it in real time. It's wild.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So we've talked about a lot of different elements of implementing an Industry 4.0 or technology. If you could summarize, what are some of the key principles then? Because we've talked through a lot of different aspects of it today. If I'm trying to capture as part of our audience now, what are some key takeaways? What are some key principles that I need to be aware of, or that I need to think about going forward if I'm just getting started?
I definitely think kind of what we've been talking about this whole time is pointed at a problem. I think that's the first place to start, is understanding that, we don't want to just deploy technology because it's flashy and cool. Start with a problem. I think the other thing too is don't get bogged down by the idea that it has to be some perfect thing right off the bat, right? It's an iterative process. I think one of the biggest things that we saw as a consultant is that companies were thinking of this incorrectly, right? The idea that Industry 4.0 is just a small project that we can do in an assembly line in a plant, I think is kind of nearsighted, right? Like the idea and what we push is that this is fundamentally changing the way that you are going to do business moving forward, right? It's taking advantage of data. It's understanding that there's this entire ecosystem of products that we could use to be a better business. And I think that's kind of, where the focus has to be is let's start with a problem. I mean, obviously you guys have all heard, start small, think big, scale fast, right? And I think that start small is probably the most important, valuable, insight that you can get, is find a quick problem, find a quick win, get value right away, and start there.
So let me just jump in, because I don't want to lose sight of, and I'd actually probably like to applaud Remus's career here, and just draw a parallel to how you started it off. And I was gonna slap you down for calling yourself just a controls guy at the beginning. It's so fundamental and foundational to operations, right? And having the operations right, the control right, and then the data that's flowing. But then you've moved through your career, and now you're at a point where you're at a hyperscale cloud provider, right? And I mean, that's a really, really big deal. And I can say, I mean, I've been in this industry for 30 years, right? And I've seen over the last decade plus people coming out, controls guys, right? Coming out and getting into positions with ERP companies and with cloud providers and things like that. And so this is a natural evolution of our space, which I think is fantastic. But I guess where I was going with that, to come back to the cloud piece of it, as a small manufacturer, and I'm sitting here and we're saying, well, it's easy. There are inexpensive sensors and there are technology solutions, and someone's going to put in their ear immediately like cybersecurity concerns. Right. And I've always thought, like, all right, well, the perfect place to be with that is with the hyperscale cloud providers, right, to protect your infrastructure. So maybe talk just a little bit about either real or perceived security concerns, how you address that with people, if they, how should they go forward and know they could do this, and you as just a controls guy trust that you can put your stuff in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, if you think, it's obviously to AWS, right? Security is paramount in everything we do. It's a foundational principle of everything that AWS does is security, right? So I think one of the ways I phrased this when I was a consultant is I was talking to a customer and they had the same question around security, right? Is what can we do to make sure we're cyber secure, everything's locked down, it's encrypted and all that stuff. And I said, you as a company, this was a pretty large company. I said, how much do you as a corporation spend on cybersecurity, right? Like a couple million, tens of millions. And then I thought, now, what do you think a company like AWS invests into security and things like that? And I think that was kind of like a light bulb moment is like, wow, you're pretty spot on, right? So I think just taking advantage of a lot of the standards and practices out there. There's no shortage of documentation and information on how to build a secure system, how to connect things securely. And, obviously if you're going down the AWS route, there's tons of services and offerings from AWS that are just baked in with security. And it's something that's always on the forefront of our thoughts and mind. And I think you can confidently, take that leap and be trustworthy, trust that there's security just baked into the solution. But, obviously you have to build a lot of that into the solution that you're providing or building.
Yeah, so that's a really good insight. I think that's something, makes me think about I'll use the word, the bazillion providers today for Industry 4.0. There's just so many of them. And so you certainly want to pick somebody who has a little bit of, probably a little bit of rubber on their soles, and they've done this before. So that they're following the best principles. But getting back to the bazillion providers, if I'm a small to mid-sized company, how do I know who to ask for help? I mean, that's a little bit scary. A small to mid-sized company often won't have this expertise in-house. So who do they ask? That's a great question. Without always going to, the largest provider who may not be set up to deal with a small or mid-sized manufacturer.
Yeah, what's great about what you guys are doing with Industry 4.0 Club is you're creating a wide network of people that have played around with it, led successful completions, just starting. You have this, basically, you've kind of built a community around exactly what you're talking about, right? So I would say if you're a small and medium company and you're looking for some insight, join these types of communities, right? The network, I think one of the interesting things around Industry 4.0 that I haven't really seen in other spaces is this giant community that's kind of sprouting up around it. It's really interesting, and it's kind of bizarre to see. It's definitely not something I would have expected to happen, but it's just like this concept of like, hey, we want to leverage everything that everybody else has done, so I don't have to go through the same errors and mistakes that somebody else has already figured out. So I think that'd be the biggest piece of advice, is just leverage the community. There's no shortage of information available. Just, I mean, we're all on LinkedIn. Ping one of us. I'm more than happy to give some insight or some help or anything that I can do at any time. All right. So there's so many different communities out there. I would just say, take advantage of it and reach out and don't be shy.
Mike Hangen, I was going to say, just really appreciate that a lot. One of the things that when I talk to someone who's a mid or small size manufacturer, I said, don't try to become an expert in any of this stuff. Find yourself your network, find an expert in AI, find an expert in virtual reality, find these experts, get to know them, develop relationships. And then when you have a question, because the technology is moving so quickly, use them to help you learn about, where that particular technology is advancing to. Don't try to become that expert. You can't afford it as a company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to comment. I mean, maybe back to your role, Remus, right? So you're a senior partner solution architect, right? Meaning, to Mike's point, all these bazillion folks that are coming out of woodwork, right? Then your role specifically is to work with those types of companies that are creating solutions, right, for deployment out into the space, right? That's how you guys are set up?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different solutions architects within the AWS framework. My group specifically focuses on manufacturing ISVs, so independent software vendors that are building manufacturing-focused solutions on AWS. So me as a partner solution architect, my goal is to work with partners building solutions for their customers, right? So, I mean, if you think broadly, think, companies like Siemens, GE, Honeywell, Rockwell, all those types of companies that are building, the future of manufacturing software, they work with PSAs like myself to kind of understand how to leverage AWS services to build those solutions.
Excellent.
So just to tap into your experience then, I know you shared some of the principles. Is there a common mistake that you've seen, or something we haven't talked about that might be useful for our audience to hear or to learn from you, from your experience?
Yeah, two come to mind right away. I think first is the fear of failure, and I think it's a common one that's discussed in not just Industry 4.0, but just in business endeavors in general. Is you can't be afraid to fail, right? Just because something didn't work out the way you thought it would the first time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a failed idea. It's maybe just the execution needs a little tender love and support and care. I'd say that, and then when you do fail, because you will, right? We all do. It's just part of what we do. I would just say fail fast, right? Just if you tried something, it didn't work, try something else, and iterate on that process until you get to a point where you have something successful. And I think the other piece of that is you don't need to start with a grandiose strategy, right? I was on a panel 2 weeks ago at a conference, and somebody in the audience asked the question, kind of the same ideas, right? Like, what if we don't have a digital transformation strategy? Can we still kind of do this? And it's absolutely, right? If you start with a problem, like we've been talking about this whole time, right? Use that problem to build your strategy, right? So you'll solve one problem, and then another one will come up, and then another one will come up, and then another one will come up, because there's not a single manufacturing facility that I know that I've ever been to that runs at 100% efficiency all the time, and everything works perfectly. So if you continue to solve these problems, you'll start to see that other plants, other facilities, other companies, whatever it might be, have a lot of those same problems, and that will start to build into this your digital strategy, right? Understanding your company and what is important to your business and how you drive that business value with the different problems that you're solving will basically build your technology stack.
So if I could just jump in with one thing real quick. So I used to say to folks, and it's amazing to me, a decade ago versus today, right? So I used to run a nonprofit, the MES Association, a decade ago. And I used to say to people, look, you either, you definitely have a strategy. It's whether you're controlling it or if it's just happening, organically from the ground up. So stuff is happening. And that used to be really dangerous, because you could architect yourself into a box that you can't get out of. Or to your point, you could be going down the path of this monolithic approach and you're not getting to all the pain points you have. Versus today, there's really less risk, I think, of moving fast, like you said, picking an opportunity, solving it, and knowing that in a cost-effective way, you're probably going to be able to leverage the data, especially if you're putting data in the cloud and that you have access to it. And so there's probably less risk today than there was a decade ago when it comes to taking that advice that you just gave, as far as jumping in and getting after it and solving problems.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good way to put it, right? That whether you know it or not, there is a strategy unfolding before your eyes. It's really, I've never thought of it that way, but that's absolutely accurate.
Well, and the key is to, once you get started, is to maybe make sure, when I work with small businesses, one of the shortcomings is they don't think about the future. Yeah. So after you've gotten some experience, is to make sure you pause and then think about, okay, what have we learned and where are we going? And make sure you take a moment and have that reflection, so that you don't, as Mike, as you mentioned, don't put yourself into a corner where you can't get back. So, well, that's great. So I think we've had a really good conversation thus far. As we get ready to wrap up this afternoon, what I'd like to do is ask for some final thoughts. And so, Mike, what are your big takeaways from the conversation today?
For me, I'm excited as I'll get out to see just a controls engineer working for AWS. Seriously, and I don't mean to keep poking at that, but I really think just watching our industry evolve and watching the lines dissolve between the shop floor and the top floor. I mean, I started working in industry in 1992, and I heard that expression the first week I was at work. And it's been such a divide between those worlds forever. Mm-hmm. And it's been going away. And so now to see someone like Remus, who has the chops, has the experience, right, to really represent both sides and know that we really don't need the lines that we've put in place. Maybe at one point they were necessary. I think they're becoming less and less necessary to have boundaries between the two worlds. So I'm just super excited to see someone like Remus in the position that he's in, and excited to keep tapping into his experience as what we're doing here with the club.
Thanks, Mike. Remus, how about your last thoughts as we get ready to wrap up today?
One of the foundational principles that I've kind of kept close to me throughout my entire career, and everything that I've done, it started as just as a controls engineer, and then through everything is to be intentional. And I think for me, being intentional in everything that we do is extremely important, especially when we start talking about Industry 4.0 and these projects that we're doing. Like, it kind of just circles back to that whole idea of, we don't want to just deploy technology for fun. I mean, granted, again, would love to. But we have to be intentional, right? Look at a problem, solve that problem, be intentional in the way we solve the problem, be intentional in the way we build our architecture. We're not just going to throw things together for the sake of it. I think that for me is kind of one of the foundational principles of everything I do. And I think that kind of carries over really well into Industry 4.0 and this era of digital manufacturing that we're seeing is just be intentional.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And I just want to add to, when you use the word be intentional, I really appreciate the conversation around start with a problem.
Yeah.
And don't just grab a piece of technology, start with a problem, figure out how to solve that problem, and then advance from there. So I thought that was really, that is, for me, that's fundamental. Too many folks I've seen historically have tried to focus on the technology and a problem. It doesn't sustain itself. So
one last thought comes to mind. It's kind of around the same idea too. Is we saw an issue with one of our customers, when we were doing the consulting gig, is once you start with that problem and you solve it and you go on to the next one, is don't lose focus of why you started the effort in the first place, right? So you can really quickly get into the technology flashy show point stuff, even after you solve that first problem. So it kind of ties back with being intentional, but just don't lose sight of that problem either, right? We started with a problem. Let's continue to solve problems, and we'll be successful from there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of draw this to a close today. So this has been the Industry 4.0 Club Fireside Chat. We've had a great conversation with Remus Pop. Remus is a senior partner solution architect with AWS. I've been joined here with my co-host Mike Yost. And Remus, we just really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts and expertise with our audience. So thank you
so much, guys. I have a blast doing these types of things, and I'm really excited to be part of the Industry 4.0 Club. I followed a lot of your fireside chats and the different things that you guys have done so far. So I'm really, really happy to be part of it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And
if you like what you listened to or heard today, please don't hesitate to check us out on our website, industry4.0club.com, and on our LinkedIn site as well. As I mentioned at the start, we hold these sorts of conversations Monday through Thursday around the 12:30 p.m. Eastern time hour, and we look forward to seeing you on future broadcasts. Thanks again, Remus. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.